41 goals, including 9 goals at the 1966 World Cup. With Benfica, Eusebio won 10 league championships and helped the side to back-to-back European Cups in the 1960s. Cristiano Ronaldo wrote on Twitter this morning, "Always eternal, Eusebio, rest in peace," alongside a picture of the two men together. After his playing career ended, he was an ambassador for Benfica and Portuguese football.
When people talk about footballing greatness, they often reduce it to trophies, numbers, or highlight reels. But some players exist on a different plane altogether, where their impact is felt not just in goals or medals, but in the memories of those who had to face them. Eusebio was one of those rare figures. Long before football became the hyper-commercialized, globally broadcast spectacle it is today, he was already redefining what a forward could be, combining explosive athleticism with elegance, humility, and an almost frightening sense of inevitability in front of goal. For defenders and midfielders alike, facing Eusebio was not simply a tactical challenge, it was a psychological one. Before we really dive deep into this story, take a moment to show your support. If you enjoy long-form football stories that go beyond the stats and dig into the human side of the game, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps keep these stories alive and reaching more people who love football history as much as we do. Sir Bobby Charlton was never a man prone to exaggeration, known for his calm demeanor, professionalism, and measured words. Charlton's praise carried weight precisely because it was so carefully given. So when he described Eusebio as one of the finest players he ever faced, and admitted that playing against him was a nightmare, it wasn't flattery, it was testimony. Charlton had faced the very best football had to offer, yet Eusebio stood apart as a forward who could dismantle an entire defensive structure on his own. Charlton often spoke about Eusebio as the complete forward, a term that is casually thrown around today but was rare in the 1960s. Eusebio could outrun defenders in open space, overpower them physically when challenged, and then, just as easily, glide past them with subtle touches and balance. He wasn't predictable. One moment he would surge forward like a sprinter, the next he would pause, feint, and let defenders commit before punishing them. That unpredictability is what made him so terrifying. You couldn't plan for him, you could only hope to survive him. Their most famous encounter came at the 1966 World Cup, a tournament that would define both men in very different ways. Eusebio entered the semi-final against England as the tournament's dominant force, having already torn defenses apart with pace, power, and ruthless finishing. Portugal had been inspired by him, lifted by his presence, and carried by his belief. Charlton, tasked with neutralizing him, later admitted that it was one of the toughest assignments of his career, not because Eusebio lacked weaknesses, but because he seemed to have none. England's eventual victory in that match was not a simple triumph over a team, but over a phenomenon. Charlton later recalled the moment when the game finally slipped away from Portugal, describing how he saw the shoulders of the great Eusebio sag and tear well in his eyes. It was an image that stayed with him, not because of victory, but because it revealed the depth of Eusebio's passion. This was not a mercenary superstar. This was a man who carried his nation on his back and felt every loss deeply. What made Eusebio even more remarkable in Charlton's eyes was his character. In an era where physicality and intimidation were common, Eusebio never resorted to bitterness or malice. Charlton often referenced the 1968 European Cup final as the perfect example. In that match, with Benfica chasing the game late on, Eusebio unleashed a powerful shot that seemed destined for the net, only for Manchester United goalkeeper Alex Stepney to pull off a stunning save. Instead of showing frustration, Eusebio stopped, applauded Stepney, and acknowledged brilliance when he saw it. Charlton called it the mark of a true sportsman, a moment that said as much about the man as any goal ever could. That same admiration is echoed across generations, perhaps most notably in the words of Cristiano Ronaldo. For Ronaldo, Eusébio is not just a legend of the past, but a foundational figure in Portuguese football, someone whose shadow still looms large over every generation that follows. Ronaldo has repeatedly referred to Eusebio as eternal, a player whose influence cannot be erased by time or surpassed by records alone. When Ronaldo began breaking Portugal's long-standing scoring records, many wondered how he would address comparisons with Eusebio. His response was always respectful, even reverent. He insisted that Eusebio would always be up there, regardless of who held the numbers on paper. In Ronaldo's view, records could change, but legacy could not. Eusebio's impact went beyond statistics. He made Portuguese football believe it belonged on the world stage. Ronaldo has also spoken about Eusebio's personal influence, recalling moments early in his international career when Eusebio offered guidance and encouragement. Those interactions mattered. They represented a passing of the torch, not through pressure or expectation, but through example. Eusebio didn't demand greatness from the next generation. He inspired it. The 1966 World Cup remains central to Eusebio's legend. Finishing as the tournament's top scorer with 9 goals, He led Portugal to a historic third-place finish, a feat that transformed the nation's footballing identity. At a time when Portugal was not considered a global powerhouse, Eusébio forced the world to pay attention. His performances were not just dominant, they were theatrical, filled with emotion, power, and purpose. Yet for all the praise he received, Eusébio never seemed comfortable being elevated above others. He spoke humbly about teammates, opponents, and the game itself. That humility is part of why figures like Charlton and Ronaldo speak of him with such respect. Greatness recognizes greatness, and in Eusébio they saw not just a rival or an idol, but a standard. Charlton's reflections on facing Eusébio reveal something deeper about football itself. The greatest opponents are not those you defeat, but those who push you to your limits, who force you to grow, adapt, and rise above yourself. Eusébio did that to everyone he faced. He made defenders better, midfielders more disciplined, and teams more united in their attempts to stop him. Even today, as modern football debates who belongs in the pantheon of all-time greats, Eusébio's name remains unavoidable. Not because of nostalgia, but because his game translates across eras. Speed, power, technique, humility, and passion are timeless qualities. They mattered then, and they matter now. In the end, Eusébio's true legacy may lie in the words of those who knew the game best. When Sir Bobby Charlton calls you a nightmare, it is not an insult. It is the highest compliment. When Cristiano Ronaldo calls you eternal, it is not exaggeration. It is acknowledgement. Eusébio was not just a footballer of his time. He was, and remains, a benchmark for what football greatness truly looks like as football evolved tactically and physically over the decades. The myth of Eusébio did not fade. Instead, it grew stronger with each new generation that studied footage of his goals and listened to the testimonies of those who faced him. Analysts often point out that if Eusébio were playing in the modern era, with today's sports science, conditioning, and global exposure, his numbers and influence could have been even more staggering. Yet, there is also a sense that part of his magic belongs specifically to his time, when raw instinct and individual brilliance could still overpower rigid systems. What made Eusébio so difficult to defend was not just his athleticism, but his intelligence. He read defenders before they committed, sensed space before it opened, and seemed to know exactly when a goalkeeper was vulnerable. Many defenders later admitted that even when they did everything right, Eusébio still found a way through. That feeling of inevitability is what separates good players from legendary ones. His shooting ability alone placed him in rare company. Eusébio could strike the ball cleanly with either foot, from distance or inside the box, under pressure or at full sprint. Goalkeepers often spoke about how little warning they had before. Where the ball was past them, there was no exaggerated backlift, no obvious telegraphing of intent. The shot would simply arrive, powerful and precise, before reactions could catch up. Beyond the pitch, Eusébio carried the burden of being a symbol. As a black player in European football during the 1960s, he navigated racism and prejudice with quiet dignity. He was adored by fans, but also scrutinized and exoticized in ways his peers were not. Rather than allowing that pressure to harden him, Eusébio responded with grace, letting his football speak while maintaining respect for opponents and supporters alike. Sir Bobby Charlton's admiration for Eusébio was rooted partly in this dignity. Charlton recognized that greatness was not just about domination, but about conduct. Eusébio's applause for Alex Stepney in the European Cup final was not a calculated gesture. It was instinctive. It revealed a man who understood that football was bigger than individual disappointment, and that excellence deserved recognition no matter the shirt. Cristiano Ronaldo, growing up in Madeira decades later, inherited a football culture shaped by Eusébio's achievements. Before Eusébio, Portuguese footballers were rarely spoken of in the same breath as the global elite. After him, belief existed. Ronaldo has often acknowledged that without figures like Eusébio, the path he walked might not have been there at all. In that sense, Eusébio's influence extends far beyond goals and trophies. It lives in opportunity. There is also a quiet tragedy in Eusébio's story that deepens his legend. Despite his brilliance, his career was marked by physical decline. In his later years, and his post-playing life was not always comfortable. Yet even as his body betrayed him, his status never diminished. He remained a revered figure in Portugal, a living reminder of what was possible when talent met courage. Fans who never saw Eusébio play live often describe a strange sense of familiarity when watching old footage. The movement feels modern. The decisions feel sharp. The emotion feels real. That is the hallmark of timelessness. Eusébio does not look like a relic of a slower game. He looks like someone who would still belong at the highest level today. Football is often obsessed with comparison, with ranking players across eras as if greatness were a simple equation. Eusébio resists that reduction. He does not need to be declared better or worse than anyone else. His place is secure because of the respect he earned from legends like Charlton and icons like Ronaldo, men who understand the game at its deepest level. In the end, Eusébio's story reminds us why football endures. It is not just about winning, all losing but about moments that stay with us, opponents who haunt us, and players who redefine what we believe is possible. Eusebio was one of those players. And as long as football is played and remembered, the Black Panther will never truly leave the pitch. There is something uniquely powerful about the way Eusebio continues to unite different generations of football fans. Supporters who watched him in the 1960s speak of awe and disbelief, while younger fans discover him through grainy footage and still feel the same sense of wonder. That connection across time is rare, and it speaks to a player whose influence is not confined to memory, but constantly renewed through retelling and reflection. Eusebio's name also carries emotional weight in Portugal that goes beyond sport. He represented pride, visibility, and belief for a nation still finding its voice on the global stage. When he played, Portugal didn't just compete, it mattered. That emotional bond explains why his legacy is guarded so carefully, not as nostalgia, but as a cornerstone of national identity. Even among the game's greatest thinkers and tacticians, Eusebio is spoken of with a certain reverence. Coaches and analysts often describe him as a player you could not solve. Systems could be adjusted, markers assigned, spaces closed, yet Eusebio still found moments to explode into life. That inability to contain him is precisely what elevated him beyond strategy and into legend. Ultimately, Eusebio's greatness lies in how he made others feel. Opponents felt fear, teammates felt confidence, fans felt joy, and future generations felt inspiration. When Sir Bobby Charlton called him a nightmare and Cristiano Ronaldo called him eternal, they were describing the same truth from different eras. Eusebio was not just part of football history. He was one of the forces that shaped it.